Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown podcast. He's Penn Live Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh, and I'm John Luciew. And we are back with some of the most compelling Steelers stories and debates regarding this upcoming NFL draft. What will the Steelers do with that first pick toward the end of this month? Actually, a week from this coming Thursday. It's almost like a game of cards, 21. Will they have a winning hand? Could they land Shedeur Sanders? Or there's a major quarterback shakeup higher in the draft that could change that calculation, and he might not fall to the Steelers. And then, of course, lots of wide receivers and D linemen associated with the Steelers at the 21 pick. We trading down, always a possibility, but we've heard from Nick before that could be hard to try to collect picks and move down. We're going to discuss that and more with Nick coming up. But first, I got to ask him, there was a little event in Pittsburgh last week with Pat McAfee, and somehow this guy who has a YouTube podcast and now he's with ESPN turned a sports sideshow into the main event, sold tickets and packed the arena in Pittsburgh. And it seemed like a wild event. I was following your tweets, lots of other tweets. I mean, how the heck did he turn a sports sideshow into a ticket selling main event like that kind of had all kind of buzz? What's going on there in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, man, that's kind of what Pat McAfee has done. He's become this larger-than-life character. He's gained a lot of popularity. Obviously, since he's from Pittsburgh, that helped, right? And so he had like a lot of Pittsburgh-centric guys or PA-centric guys, for example. Shane Gillis was there. Wiz Khalifa was there. Snoop Dogg's a Steelers fan. He was there. They gave performances. There were a lot of crazy guests on there. If you saw at the end, 5 different Pittsburgh athletes were on that show. Big Ben, Paul Skeens, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, Chris Letang, all 5 of those from all 3 different teams were there. Man, it's kind of crazy to see that. I mean, but he has just blown up in popularity, and obviously having him from Pittsburgh, that kind of added to it, and that became that big sideshow, man. And I've heard from people that went live, it was just fantastic. I wasn't able to go there, but that was all over the place if you just watch it on YouTube while it was streaming too. And people that went live, they said it was great.
Yeah, that is incredible. And it really shows you that sports fandom in the 412 area code is on a different level. There was no coincidence that he picked Pittsburgh for his debut live event. Unfortunately, the Pittsburgh sports teams aren't on that high of a level right now, and the Steelers certainly are going to try to use the draft to rebuild and get back to that level that we always expect in the Steelers, the town with 6 Lombardis. And it's funny because, previously we'd been talking a lot about Aaron Rodgers. We really haven't mentioned his name and probably won't in this podcast. But ever since this idea of Shedeur Sanders becoming a possibility for the Steelers, and then there was that meeting that they had in Pittsburgh with Sanders, apparently lasted like 5 hours, according to some of the reports I've heard on it, that he is becoming a tangible possibility, at least in the Steelers fans' minds, and they're kind of liking it. But there is certainly a shakeup with the Saints and their starter, Derek Carr, dealing with a shoulder injury that might sideline him for the entire season, require surgery. Does that really change the calculation that possibly the Saints and Sanders are going to be reviewing that? And then we got late-breaking word from Schefter that Sanders is holding a private workout Thursday in Boulder for a contingent of officials from the New York Giants. So the Giants seems like they're back looking at Shedeur very closely. Is all of this talk about Sanders to the Steelers hot air? How real is that possibility? And, what's the latest winds blowing at that 21st pick you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Sanders stuff is crazy. It's not, because not only are the Giants working out Shedeur, but they're holding workouts with guys like Tyler Shuck and Jalen Milroe as well. So not just one player. They're doing their due diligence at the quarterback position. So we'll see. I don't think he's going in the top 3. I truly do believe that ultimately, when it comes down to it, the Giants will take whichever player, Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, does not go at 2 to the Browns. It seems like the Browns are probably leaning more towards Travis Hunter right now, which means 3 is probably going to be Abdul Carter. This is kind of what I think is going to end up happening. So I think the Giants will pass, at least with the first round. I think the Saints are interesting. Now, I don't think this Carr stuff is kind of out of the blue for them. I think it's out of the blue for us. But it sounds like they've known about this for a decent bit. I don't want to say going back to the combine, but I do think they've known it for a few weeks. So, their actions over the last few weeks, for example, Shedeur's showcase in Colorado at Colorado's Pro Day was the 4th. I think they already knew about Derek Carr's injury at that time. And so I don't think this changes their behavior. I think that, the Saints need to be sure that whoever they draft would be the game changer for them. Is Shedeur that guy? I'm not sure. I think that they also have other pressing needs, but I could see them being in the play for Shedeur. I'm not going to say it's certain. I don't think it's 100% slam dunk or anything. I think they're a threat for it. I think they're a team to watch. Outside of them, though, I mean, if he falls past the Saints, there's really not many other options for him. The other threat, we've talked about this before, is one of those teams at the bottom, coming into the bottom of the first round from, the Saints, the Giants could come back in, the Browns could come back in. If they really like Shedeur, could they jump ahead of the Steelers with the Broncos or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or some team like that and go up to get him? I think that's the other one I just look for. And then if there's multiple teams that want to do that, maybe that's how the Steelers can kind of pin them against each other and maybe get their own trade back scenario going. We'll see. But that's kind of how that's going to work out, I think, with Shedeur. So, yeah, there's a real chance he falls to 21. I still don't think it's a lock, even if he falls to 21, they take it. I don't. I think he's a possibility. He's one of the many names that the Steelers like. But the Steelers are all over the place this year with their interest. They have really done a much better job this year of keeping their true interest and the guys that they really love under wraps a little more. Some of the guys that they really like, that I know they like, did not come in for 30 visits this year, pre-draft visits. They all 30 of their pre-draft visits are now kind of out there. You would know what they are by this point. Guys that aren't among that are guys like Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, Mecca Egbuka, Kenneth Grant. I mean, these are 4 guys I know they like. So just because they didn't bring them in for pre-draft visits this year doesn't necessarily mean they won't draft them. So what's going to happen at 21, I think, is a great question. Here's what I'll throw to you, John. I'll throw 2 thoughts to you. Mm-hmm. One, the one defensive lineman they did bring in this year was Derek Harmon. They hadn't really had much contact with him prior to that 30 visit. They had met with him at the combine formally, and it was that. 2 points of contact for Derek Harmon. They really like Derek Harmon. Now, they've explored mid-round defensive tackles a lot in this class, but I know they like Harmon, and I think he's a name to seriously consider at 21. Outside of D-line, receiver, and quarterback, we talk about Shedeur at wide receiver. Matthew Golden is one of the only guys that checks every single box of traditional interest for them. Combine formal, Tomlin Kahn at the pro day, and on top of that, a pre-draft visit. He checks every single box that you look at. So he's another name to watch that I would keep an eye on. But here's where I look at their pre-draft visits, where I say, this is a little odd. They've met with Darius Alexander out of Toledo, Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, and Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. Why do I mention those 6 guys? Those 6 guys are in this weird kind of area where they are all projected to go far enough back from 21 that it would be a reach, but they are not getting anywhere near 83. They're kind of in this middle tier where the Steelers are kind of not there. And to me, this suggests the wide-ranging encapsulation of their visits, the fact that they've brought in anything from a safety to a corner to a receiver to a quarterback to a running back, et cetera, to these interesting early second-rounders to middle, top of the third-round guys. That suggests to me they are heavily considering or would like to trade back. I think that it's a definite want for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think they would love to trade back, recoup a pick that they got, or try to recoup the pick that they got in the DK Metcalf trade. We've talked about why that's going to be tough, just because if you want a quarterback, you would theoretically want to trade up in front of Pittsburgh to go get that quarterback. But the scenario where the Steelers can actually get that to happen is if Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart falls, and one of those teams really loves those guys, and you can pit them against each other. And you could say Cleveland, New York, New Orleans, come up to 21. We're not the threats to take them. You guys can get the 20 pick, and we can come back. And I think, you look at what you could get for 21. So let's say the Giants want to come up from 34 to get Shedeur Sanders, but they want to get in front of the Browns, right? Because I could see the Browns drafting Travis Hunter and wanting to get Shedeur Sanders and pair them together. Makes sense. So if they want to come up, the Browns could maybe offer you their second round pick and a third round pick. They have a few third round picks, but you could be there with the Giants and say, we could get 34 and 65 and go back 13 spots and get that extra top of the third round pick. The very first pick of the third round actually is what that one is. You could take that deal. And so there's a trade back scenario there. What do I think happens at 21 right now? It is a mess all over the place. I'm hearing a lot of different things. The Steelers are doing a nice job this year. And I think it's a credit to them of not making their interest obvious. We've talked about how they really are interested in defensive line, how they're clearly interested in running back, and they will draft a running back and a defensive tackle, I believe, within their first 3 picks of this class. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a first-round pick, because both those groups, as we've talked about really since the Senior Bowl, John, how deep running back and defensive line are in this class. So that depth of those two spots gives them unique advantages to look at round 1 as an opportunity of BPA, best player available. And so I've heard some interest in running backs. I think Travion Henderson's a really sleeper option. I know a lot of people will be like, really, that guy in the first round? And you look at the teams that have visited with him, that I've heard have interest in him. I mean, he's going to be the running back 3 off the board. I think he will go off the board after Ashton Jeanty and Omarion Hampton. Omarion Hampton, someone else the Steelers brought in. You're looking at round 1 running backs. But Henderson's this speed back, really good pass pro, can do things in the receiving game. He is a guy that probably doesn't get out of the first round, I think. And so he could be a trade back option for the Steelers if they trade back to, say, 30. I think that's more of a tangible option for them than it would be if they don't do that. And so the Steelers have a lot of different players all over the board. I think if I had to guess right now, I do think I still would probably lean defensive line or wide receiver the way I've been leaning all draft cycle. But, I mean, you can't rule out one of these running backs. You can't rule out a quarterback. You can't rule out a corner. And you really can't rule out even Nick Herbig, the safety from South Carolina, who they've shown a ton of interest in. So there's a lot of different players you can go at from all these different angles. But the Steelers right now have really cast a wide net, which means they want to go BPA. They want to have the best player they possibly can. And to me, some of the visits that they've had really signal a desire to trade out of that spot and try and get another draft pick and then take someone else in that trade down scenario. And so there's a lot of things to consider. But if you are looking at traditional metrics of interest where, we're talking about the combine, the pro day, the 30 visit, if you're going to make a prediction of a guy this year to come outside of that vortex, this would be the year, right? Kenneth Grant doesn't necessarily fit nicely into either of those. And Emeka Egbuka doesn't necessarily fit nicely into those. So there's a lot of options they can look at even outside the guys they've met with that make a whole lot of sense for them. And so I think they have done a nice job of really covering their bases, casting a wide net. And while doing it, I think people don't necessarily know exactly what they're going to do. It really feels like the first time in a really long time because, John, we knew in 21 they were taking Najee Harris. We knew in 22 they were going to take quarterback. We didn't know which quarterback, but we knew it was going to be a quarterback. 23, we probably knew it was going to be an offensive lineman, probably Broderick Jones. 2024, we knew it was going to be a tackle or a center. Just didn't know which one. It was Troy Fautanu. This year, you can't even necessarily pinpoint one position. I think that is kind of a credit to the Steelers, but I also think their visit radar, their kind of net of interest depicts this desire to try and trade out of that 21 spot and maybe go back and take another guy and get that extra second pick in day 2 so they can have 3 picks in the first 3 rounds, and that could actually help them fill an extra hole.
No, I love that scenario that you painted about this competition for one of the falling quarterbacks. If that does happen, that maybe the Steelers can do business at 21 because they would prefer that extra pick over whatever quarterback falls to that scenario. And I'm glad you mentioned Travion Henderson because I'm sensing some buzz building around him. And certainly we know Arthur Smith wants to make that running game more explosive so they can get the yards in chunks, not the volume that we saw, with some of those offensive running game plans, like watching paint dry. It was all volume running it, for minimal yardage that accumulated of the stats that we saw. It wasn't explosive plays. And we know explosive plays are what makes the difference in the NFL, whether it's passing or in the running game. It just seems like that dude is gaining some steam, but you indicate that they would rather take him in a trade down scenario. Do you think there's any way they stand pat in 21 if they can't get that trade down and they take Henderson anyway? Is there any way he is the pick at 21?
I mean, I guess there is. They've had off-the-wall picks before. I mean, Terrell Edmonds already burned. It's definitely not completely crazy. I don't think it will happen. I can see them viewing Travion Henderson through the lens of Jahmyr Gibbs in that manner. We've talked about how they kind of have built this team in the shadow of the Philadelphia Eagles, in the shadow of the Detroit Lions, which is build up your trenches, specifically offensive line. And those teams, in the Eagles' case, they paid Saquon Barkley. In the Lions' case, they spent a first-round pick on Jahmyr Gibbs. And I could see the Steelers looking at an explosive playmaker like Travion Henderson, this home run guy, and seeing him through that leg. I could see him being that type of guy. Now, both those squads generally have another guy. The Eagles had Kenneth Gainwell spell Saquon at times. Obviously, the Lions have David Montgomery, who gives them the 1-2. And so, even if they drafted Henderson, that guy would be just one of, right? He wouldn't be both. He would probably be in addition to Jalen Warren. And so, I think that if they drafted a guy like that, it would be with the intent to sign Jalen Warren long-term, have him be a 1-2 punch, and make that a severely very talented backfield, to be quite honest with you, if that's what that was. I think Travion Henderson's a good player. I do personally think that's a little rich for my liking. I'd like Travion Henderson, but 21 is a little rich. I think if you trade down, you could definitely talk yourself into it more. But 21 is a little rich for me on that. So I could see it happening. I just have a hard time buying into the round 1 running back this draft. I can understand if you think Henderson is this stud, but there's a lot of options even on round 3 and round 4. I'm talking about DJ Giddens, Dylan Sampson, RJ Harvey, Jadon Blue. There's just so many good players in this class, and it's a little hard for me to fully buy in to a round 1 running back as a result of that, even though there's very talented players at that position. So maybe that they would consider it. I don't think he's at the top of their board necessarily at 21. It can't be ruled out. I wouldn't say it's the likeliest scenario right now for the Steelers. I would consider a wide receiver like Golden or a defensive lineman like Harmon a little more likely than that.
And the other thing I'm sensing is somewhat of a positive reappraisal of the quarterback class. I mean, when we first started talking about looking ahead to this draft, it was kind of a, underwhelming quarterback class, but certainly the Steelers have done a lot of due diligence at quarterback. There's some Sanders. The whole Sanders question is probably going to go down to the last minute of where he comes off the board. Some are saying there could be maybe 4 picks in the first round at quarterback, and some people are saying, well, that's why you kind of have to look at this class and not plan for what's supposed to be a blockbuster class in 2026. That who knows what a year will do to the reappraisal of that class. How do you feel about this idea? We know the Steelers need a quarterback. And you say they are probably going to take a quarterback in one of the later rounds, regardless. But is there anything that solves their franchise quarterback vacancy in this draft?
I have a hard time seeing that still. I know there's been some kind of revisionism, if you will, about some of the players in this class. I do think what's going to happen this year is a little more pushing those guys up. I think we're going to see probably 2 quarterbacks in the second round, which is something we haven't seen in recent years. But I don't really love either of those players in the second round. And so I think we're going to get 3 first-round quarterbacks. Here's what I'll say. I think you're going to get Dart, Sanders, and Ward, of course, in the first round. So I think you're going to have 3 first-round quarterbacks. I think Milroe has a really good chance to either go maybe bottom round 1 or the very first pick of the second round. I think the Browns are probably going to draft Jalen Milroe. That's kind of what I feel. Maybe they'll trade up. I don't know. We'll see. And then you get the Giants. I could see them hopping on someone, maybe a Tyler Shuck. I mean, is it out of the realm of possibility if one of those teams doesn't come up to take Shedeur Sanders that picks 1 and 2 of the second round are indeed quarterbacks? I don't think it's completely crazy. Now, we'll see kind of how that kind of puts out, because you would imagine if Dart, Sanders, and of course Ward are off the board, some of those teams have taken a quarterback. But I think it's very possible we get five quarterbacks in the top 50. But again, I've said this many times, I do not view really any of those quarterbacks outside of Cam Ward in that type of light. I do like Shedeur Sanders, as a late first, early second type quarterback, but Milroe that early, Dart that early, Shuck that early, especially to me, Shuck. I mean, I understand there's some interesting things on his tape, but this was the first year he played more than 7 games in a 7-year career in college. The durability issues are significant, and there's a lot of questions about his game. Milroe is a really fun toolsy player. He's got great upside, but he's got severe questions around his accuracy and other things. Dart, again, talented, but just got decent tools, not elite tools. He's definitely gonna have to take a leap as a player processor overall. And so there's just questions about this class to me that I don't have answered. If I were the Steelers, I would much rather wait till the 4th round and take Will Howard. That is what I think I would do. I understand Will Howard's not this game changer, but the Steelers need a young quarterback in there anyways. You need to take shots at a quarterback. I think Howard's an interesting player because he's got this beautiful deep ball. He plays best football down the stretch. He's accurate. He fits what they want to do offensively with Metcalf and Pickens and pushing the ball down the field. And so I think he makes sense for them. But this is not a good quarterback class. It's not bad in 2022 terms. That one was just the pit. That was the absolute worst quarterback class we've seen in a while. It's not that bad because Cam Ward, I think Shedeur Sanders, those guys are better than those prospects, but it's not a good class. And so I know we've seen some revisionism around that, and there will probably be guys that go earlier than they should. If I were the Steelers, I'd be out on that.
Okay, and I totally agree with you, and I think 4th round getting Howard, I'd be happy with that for sure. Going back to that 21st pick and all the different options that the Steelers have, if they pick at that point, if they take a wide receiver at 21, I mean, that's a big statement. Do we read anything into that regarding the future of George Pickens? Is there anything to be read into that?
I mean, I don't think that would be good for his long-term idea of being with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't necessarily think it means a ton about his now. I don't think just because they, for example, would take Matthew Golden, that he would suddenly be traded. Now, is it opening up to more of a possibility at that point? Sure, I can buy into that. Do I think they will trade him on draft night? Not unless he's going to request out. And again, that still has not happened. I've not heard anything about that. I don't think that is going to happen either. So there's no intent to trade George Pickens this year. I think the idea is to let George Pickens play out this last year of his contract. What I do think is George Pickens is just, we talked about this. I just don't think they're going to extend it. And so it's as much a pick now as it is for the future, right? And so if you draft a wide receiver in the 1st round, that's telling me And a guy like Golden, for example, or Egbuka, if they draft them, they can play in the slot. They can play inside or outside. So it doesn't kind of replace George Pickens right away. They can replace him next year, but they can coexist with him this year because they can play in that slot role. And if they sign Aaron Rodgers, like we believe is going to happen at some point, he's going to play a lot of shotgun 11 personnel. So you're going to have a lot of 3 wide receivers anyways if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. So that could make sense. And Golden fits exactly what Rodgers loves and his quick separators and et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't think necessarily it implies that he's gone this year. I think it would hurt his chances of getting a long-term deal, which I don't really expect the Steelers to hand out this offseason either. So that's kind of what I would look at with George Pickens. We'll see. It's going to be up to him this year to kind of prove that he deserves that long-term deal. If he does prove that, then maybe they tag him and try and sign him long-term. But I don't think a first-round receiver necessarily means he's going to be traded, day 2 of the draft. I think it just showcases more about their feelings about him past 2025.
Speaking of a different trade, ever since TJ Watt put that peace out photo on Instagram, there's been some speculation, more than speculation. We know that the contract talks are kind of not going anywhere. We have JJ Watt kind of unofficially negotiating, saying, hey, the Steelers could have signed him last year. The price has gone up. We know the threshold set by Myles Garrett is $40 million. But we also know that, TJ's 30 years old. He's coming off some of the worst stats of his career. And the always reliable fire breather Mark Madden writes this about the prospects of signing or trading TJ Watt. Watt is 30, and it can be presumed that his abilities are eroding. He played in all 18 games this past season, but had 0 sacks in 10 of them. He had no stats whatsoever in 2 games. His pedestrian total of 11.5 sacks was 8th most in the NFL. It's his lowest total in a season when he played 15 or more games since 2017, which was his rookie year. We hear that Watt is chipped and double-teamed constantly, but that's always been the case. If you're worth $40 million per, you've got to overcome, unquote. That is Madden saying it would be crazy for the Steelers to pay anywhere near $40 million per for TJ Watt. Now, we know as realists in Pittsburgh, a trade probably won't happen, but Nick, should it? And what could the Steelers realistically get for TJ Watt?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's not going to happen. And what he's doing with those posts, it's just typical contract negotiation posts. You're trying to get $40 million. I'm sure he wants to get more than $40 million. I don't think he's going to end up getting it. I kind of think he's going to probably end up getting 39-ish, probably somewhere around there. He's getting close, but he's not going to quite get it. And so here's what I would say about TJ Watt. You're talking about the best player on your team. Doesn't matter, really. He's the best player on the football team. And he is a valuable player because he plays at the most valuable position on the team. When we talk about a trade, to me, it has to come into the scope of how close do you think you are as a franchise? Because TJ Watt is 30. But do you think by the time you're theoretically off the ground and playing at a high level again, and you're theoretically a Super Bowl contender, do you think he's still in his prime and a legitimately elite player still? That's going to be the question, because you're paying $40 million for elite player. You're not paying for just above average play. And so what you have to answer is that. And so here's a few thoughts. One, if you look at Hall of Fame edge rushers, you look at the top edge rushers of the last generation. I'm talking guys like DeMarcus Ware. I'm talking about guys that stayed healthy. These guys age pretty well, generally. Elite edge rushers have a deeper bag than one move. TJ Watt in the past years has just used that rip and dip speed rush. And he's been a one move kind of guy for a while. But if you look back at his early game tape, he has a lot of moves still in the bag. So theoretically, the older he gets, the more he's just going to bring out moves. And that could actually make him more dangerous at points if he can bring out more moves. And so Hall of Fame edge rushers like TJ Watt very often do age gracefully. And so there are still guys that are in age 32, 33 seasons getting 15 sacks. And if that's the case with Watt, then he could be worth it as a top flight edge rusher. Because if we're talking about quarterback timelines, we're talking about drafting a quarterback in 2026, right? We're talking about drafting that quarterback. You need the rookie season, and then the second year is generally the year you think you're going to take off, right? That's liftoff. Rookie year, you can get far. Jaden Daniels just went to the NFC Championship. Big Ben obviously did that with the Steelers. But the Super Bowl is generally year 2. That's a year 2 consideration. No rookie has done the Super Bowl thing. They've never won a Super Bowl as a quarterback like that. And so Watt at that point would be 33 years old. Do you think he's still going to be elite? That's good. That's the calculation. And there are signs to support that. But as you mentioned, this year, the lowest sack total he had in years, the lowest pressure rate he had in years. So, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. But here's the thing. I don't know what they're going to get for him. I think they would probably get an early second to late first. I think that's about right. I don't think they're going to get this king's ransom, 2 firsts, and what Garrett would have gotten, for example. Garrett, maybe if he had been traded, would have gotten 2 firsts. I don't think the Steelers would get that for TJ Watt. I think they'd get a first or an early second. So maybe they can get 2 day 2 picks. Maybe they can get a second and a third, something like that. Something like that type of haul. I think that's what they would be able to get for TJ Watt. So definitely not nothing. He's definitely a valuable asset if you trade him. You can get that late 1 from a team. You can get an early second plus another thing. I think if you get a first-round pick, maybe you can get a first plus, a third or a fourth, something like that for him. I think that's realistic for TJ Watt, for an elite edge rusher. And so I think, you would consider it if you don't think that they are in that Super Bowl window, or he's going to be out of that. If he doesn't fit your window, then yeah, I think you would think about it. And so if Watt wants 4 or 5 years, he clearly plans to play until he's, 35. And so I think that's another consideration. If he clearly wants to play and you think he fits that window, I think it makes sense. I will say this, though. I think the Steelers are in a unique position where if they traded TJ Watt, they have 2 edge rushers already. Like, I think Nick Herbig could start and be a really good player. I think Alex Highsmith is a really good player. And so I don't think it's ludicrous to talk about trading TJ Watt. They're not gonna. And there's data to support why they shouldn't. Hall of Fame edge rushers are good players into their mid-30s. They are still great players, and they are contributors to Super Bowl winning teams. It has been shown before what these guys can do even into their 30s. So there's this idea, and it's not crazy to keep TJ Watt. But I understand if you say, man, he's been hurt a lot over his career recently. He's just coming off his slowest year of his career, largely, again, due to injuries, honestly. I mean, he had 11 and a half sacks, I think, in week 14, and then just got shut out the last 4 or 5 weeks of the year. So he's having a good year, and then he had that ankle injury in Philadelphia. He had a thumb injury. I mean, those really slowed him down. And so the Steelers kind of need to look at where TJ fits into the equation in terms of timeline. But by signing him, you are telling me you think he's still going to be an elite or borderline elite edge rusher at the age of 33. That notion is not absurd, considering historical edge rusher comps of TJ Watt's caliber. But if you do trade him, I think you can get some valuable pieces for him too. That makes sense if you're trying to kind of soft rebuild this.
No, that's a great sort of breakdown and sort of like really objective looking at it, the for and against. Like you said, though, I don't think they're going to trade him. But the one interesting thing in looking at the impassioned Yinzer debate on social media, one person who got dragged into this was Nick Herbig, who you mentioned being really good and who I really like. But some of the Yinzers in defense of Watt were kind of poo-pooing Herbig. One person named Samuel Gold posted on X, quote, Nick Herbig does not do a single thing better than TJ Watt. I don't think this fan base understands how bad of a run defender Nick Herbig is. If they trade TJ, edge is an immediate priority. What do you make of that? Of the sort of looking at Herbig and sort of downplaying his skills to prop up TJ Watt and the idea of trying to defend Watt and the argument for keeping him as a Steeler.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Nick Herbig is some elite run defender. I don't think that is a huge debate. I mean, he's a lighter edge rusher. He's a lightning quick pass rusher, man. He's also young. He's only 23. So, TJ Watt, early TJ Watt was not a good run defender, really. He struggled in that area too. Same with Alex Highsmith. They developed that. Highsmith's now a great run defender. TJ Watt is an elite run defender. Herbig can grow into that. I mean, he's only 240 pounds, so you're going to have some natural limitations with that. But this guy is an absolute dynamo as a speed rusher. And his production, in terms of what he does as a pass rusher, is elite. And so I think that's downplaying Herbig a little too much, probably. Like, Nick Herbig's a really good player. I think people got to understand this, just because I think you have one hole in your game, as it doesn't mean this guy is not a really good player. He's a starter level worthy player, but he kind of looks to me like someone like Bryce Huff, for example, or a Hassan Reddick. Now, Reddick is the type of guy that developed that run defense. Huff hasn't really done that. He's kind of been a sub-package pass rusher, a very productive one, but Reddick has done it, and Herbig kind of fills into that kind of void, and he can do it. And so, in heading into year 3, that's going to be the big thing for Nick Herbig. But I think this guy, man, is a really fun player. And I think Nick Herbig has the potential to be an absolute stud. And so I think downplaying him, if you did trade TJ Watt, would you need another edge rusher to probably be a run defense focused player? Yes. Would you, however, not be able to start Nick Herbig? I think that's ludicrous. I think he's a starter level player right now, and I think he has the potential to be an absolute stud. I mean, in limited snaps, he had 7 sacks last year. If you look at his limited snaps from his rookie year, he's just a menace in the way he can create disruption on speed rushes. He's got some power to his game. He is a really fun player. And so Nick Herbig has a lot of upside to fill in his game still. He's not a finished product, but he's only 23. The run defense definitely does need work, so I think they would need to draft another guy to fill that in. But it's not unheard of for teams in the league to have deep edge rotations with really good pass rushers and then another run defender to come in. That's not a crazy thing in the NFL. That's actually, on a lot of these top teams. For example, the Eagles had that this year. It's not crazy to imagine that being a thing. So I do think, if you trade TJ Watt, obviously you need another edge rusher, but I think Herbig would be fine as a starter.
Hey, message to all you Yingers out there. Defend TJ Watt all day long. You won't get an argument from me on that, but don't bum on Nick Herbig. Come on, the guy is a stud. I agree with you, Nick. And obviously we're going to be back on Tuesday, a few days before the big draft following Thursday. So is there, and you talked about how the signals out of the Steelers have been all over the place. We don't know what's going to happen at pick 21. Is there any chance there'll be more clarity there as the draft approaches, or are we going to go into this draft, be a few hours in and still not know what's going to happen at pick 21 as the Steelers are getting closer to be on the clock, probably around 10 at night, maybe 10:30,
Yep.
something like that. How do you think it's going to unfold?
I'm sure we'll get some more clarity about where certain players will land, so that will take guys off the board. So I don't think it's crazy that we can kind of figure out a few more context clues and kind of patch in where you think they're going to go. But I think this is going to be one of the more wide open drafts. And I think, you can talk about guys that you had all 30 visits. I think you can talk about guys that they didn't, because there's other signs of interest in those guys. So I think it's going to be a little bit more all over the board. There's not going to be one player or even one position. And so that is really something I think the Steelers have done well. And so I don't think we're going to necessarily have a super clear picture, if you will, like we did last year, where it's going to be, it's going to be one of those offensive linemen. This year, I don't even know the position. It could be so many different positions. It could be so many different players. And so we'll see. I think there's more positions. I think there's positions that are realer than others. Like I think the line and receiver probably do stick out as two that are a little bit more real. But I mean, there's off the wall options like Nick Herbig who are also very real. So it's all over the place, man. We'll see. This is going to be the most uncertain draft since 2020, because obviously in 2020 you didn't have the record to kind of watch because the pro days didn't happen, right? And so, you probably, even then though, I think a lot of people pegged that round 2 pick to be a wide receiver. I think the last time I can remember this being this uncertain, 2018 maybe when they took Terrell Edmonds? I mean, that was pretty uncertain. 2019 was pretty uncertain too, just because it didn't feel like Bush or White was going to make it to them. Obviously, they ended up trading up for Devin Bush. But we'll see. This is going to be, I think, a really wild process for them. I think they could go a lot of different directions. They've done their homework on basically every option and every position of need, so they'll be very well informed to pick who they think is the best option.
All right, there you have it, guys. A wild draft in store, and we will be back next Tuesday to touch on all the latest breaking news going into that draft. And of course, all the debates going on in Steelers social media that I always keep a watch on. And I like to bring those questions to Nick so he can straighten us out on the real information. Until then, Omar Khan, get busy, man. We want some playmakers in this upcoming draft.